Hey, we're in a series called Good News. We're going through the Gospel of Mark. We are going to finish chapter 1 this morning. And the headline for today is Jesus Cleanses Trauma. That's the story we're going to look at. That's what we're going to talk about. Trauma often defines people's identity. Our identity is really just like kind of how we see ourselves. If I were to introduce myself to you and I said, tell me about yourself, odds are you're going to tell me what you think. I lost my words, I'm sorry. You're going to tell me how in your eyes you have worth. So you're probably going to tell me your job. You're going to tell me your occupation. Or you're going to say, well, I'm a mom. Or I'm in school right now. Or I'm retired. There's this idea that somehow our identity is tied to our worth. It's not rooted in any truth. I think it's more rooted in culture. But often, it's trauma that defines our identity. Think about people who have been diagnosed with a sickness. Let's start with diabetes, right? Have you ever heard someone say, I have diabetes? I don't hear that often. What I normally hear is, I'm a diabetic. Now, maybe I'm splitting hairs here, but that doesn't define who you are. People say things like, well, I'm a cancer survivor. Well, that's exciting, but that doesn't tell me who you are. That tells me there was a trauma in your life that is still hurting. People will say, well, I'm a very anxious person. Okay, but that's not who you are. Oftentimes it's sickness from a trauma. Sometimes it's an event. And forgive me if this gets painful. But sometimes it's a trauma of abuse. Something that happened when you were younger, or something that maybe even happening to someone now. They feel like that's just kind of who you are or what you deserve. For some, it's the feeling of being abandoned. Maybe it was from parents, maybe it was from a spouse. There's this victim trauma that overtakes identity sometimes. And sometimes they'll even say, I'm an abuse survivor, but we're still tied back to that trauma. Sometimes it's even a bad decision that's resulted in a situation in our life. For example, people will say, well, I'm an addict. Like, okay, you may struggle with an addiction. You may even have an addiction. But that is not who you are. I had a friend who used to tell people he was an ex-con. It's like, hey man, but you don't have to bring that up. Nobody's thinking about that. Nobody's worried about that. Just because we made a bad decision doesn't have to define us for the rest of our lives. For some of us, it's a failure, whether it was a failure in business, whether it was a failure in a relationship, whether it was a failure in a marriage, or it was a significant loss. My parents died too young, my wife walked out on me, whatever it is, this trauma defines people. And however you want to package that, you feel less than. There's something wrong with me. I'm not like everybody else. I'm different, and not just different, but I'm not worth as much as everyone else. I'm broken. I'm not good enough. It's the idea that I'm even a little bit dirty, or the best word that we're going to use is the word used today in scriptures, unclean. Just not quite what I could be, should be. And this defines us. Are you in Mark chapter 1? We're going to begin in verse 40 here, but just to kind of give you some context, Jesus was teaching in the synagogue, and they were just blown away by how well he teaches, much like you are experiencing right now. They said, man, he teaches with authority. And while he's teaching, some guy just starts yelling out in the service, we know who you are, Jesus, the Son of God. And it's a guy who had a demon, and Jesus cast out the demon. And they're like, this guy teaches with authority, and he casts out demons. Well, that night they go back to Peter's house, and Peter's mom is sick, and they're like, hey, it's going to be a little weird. My mother-in-law is sick, And what does Jesus do? He heals her. Now, we're all like, of course he does that. These are all new things to the disciples, and there's only 4 of them, right? You got, I said Peter. His name is Simon. It's going to become Peter. Most of you know that. Simon, Andrew, James, and John. They didn't know how well Jesus taught. They didn't know he could cast out demons. They didn't know he could heal people. He starts healing people. They start bringing all the sick people. That's what we talked about last week. Well, dude, if he can heal that person, let's heal this person. Like everything he does just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And Mark is beginning the story of his gospel, and he's ramping up to all the things Jesus can do. So Jesus heals a bunch of people on Saturday night, and Sunday morning, Jesus goes off to be by himself, and they come find Jesus, and they're like, hey, everybody's looking for you. There's more sick people. And Jesus says, let's get out of here. Let's go to the next town so I can preach there. That's the reason I came. I'm not here just to do miracles. I'm bringing a message. Repent, the kingdom is at hand. Jesus says, I don't want to just be known for what I can do for people. Is that how we know Jesus? A lot of times, we're coming to Jesus asking what he can do. So there's this awkward exchange where Jesus doesn't really beat them up, but he says, I'm not going back to town to heal all those people. We're going to the next town. The message is bigger than the miracles. Now, what was the word I told you that Mark uses all the time? Immediately. He uses it like every other sentence. I don't know why he didn't use it here. But Jesus just makes this big point about, guys, we're going to be about preaching. And the very next story that Mark decides to tell is Jesus healing a guy with leprosy. Now, you would think if Mark's trying to make the point that Jesus is moving away from healing and miracles, he just wouldn't include that story or put it later. But he was led by the Spirit to include a story immediately. I can't believe he didn't use it. He uses every other word. But let's look at Mark 40. And we're going to look at sometimes trauma or trauma identity creates a distance. Verse 40. And a leper came to him, imploring him, and kneeling, says to him, if you will, you can make me clean. Ever meet a leper? Yeah, it's not a disease we struggle with a lot anymore. It was a serious problem back then. He says, if you will, you can make me clean. That if you had leprosy, you were considered unclean. Now, this term unclean originally comes up way back in Genesis 6 when God is telling Noah to load the animals on the ark. He says, load 7 of every clean animal and 2 of every unclean. And some of you are going, I thought they went by pairs onto the ark. They did. But the clean animals, there were 7. And clean and unclean way back in Genesis 6 really just meant animals that were acceptable for sacrifice. Those were the clean ones. And animals that were unacceptable for sacrifice. Clean and unclean were synonymous with acceptable and unacceptable. And then comes Leviticus 11, vegan's least favorite passage in the Bible, where Moses is giving instruction from the Lord about which animals are clean to eat and unclean to eat. These animals are clean, they're acceptable for you to eat. These animals are unclean, they are unacceptable for you to eat. So this term of clean and unclean, you can understand why it would feel an awful lot like it means the exact same thing as acceptable and unacceptable. And you come to Leviticus 13, and God's giving them instructions through Moses about what to do when someone has this horrible skin disease of leprosy. It's highly contagious, and there was a quarantine period. It wasn't just 2020, they had quarantine then. There were quarantine periods where they would see if this person was contagious or not. They were trying to protect the community, and they were trying to protect the individual. But in Leviticus 13, it says, let the leprous person who has the disease, the leprous person who has the disease shall wear torn clothes and let the hair of his head hang loose. And he shall cover his lip and cry out, unclean, unclean. He shall remain unclean as long as he has a disease. He is unclean. He shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. So somebody has a traumatic experience where they're exposed to this disease, whether they touched somebody who had it or they came into contact with somebody who had it, and now they've got to wear torn clothes, they've got to wear their hair hanging down, they've got to kind of cover their mouth, like they didn't have masks like we could sell back a couple years ago. And then they had to shout, unclean, I'm unclean. Like when people came close, get away from me. Yes, it protected the community. Yes, it protected the people who had disease from being beat by the community, chased off. But imagine if every time you got close to somebody, we're not talking 6 feet, get away from me, I'm unclean. Oh, that probably felt, I'm unacceptable. I'm not good. There's something wrong with me. Doesn't mean they did anything wrong, but now there's something wrong. Now, I'm not saying what God did wasn't right. This is actually very loving, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on that, but he was protecting the community. He was protecting the lepers. But when this leper comes up to Jesus and says, if you will, you can make me clean, he's not supposed to be anywhere near Jesus. He's definitely not supposed to be near a group of people. He's supposed to keep his distance. Are there rules about who can and can't come to Jesus? There's not supposed to be. So why does it feel that way to people outside the church? Oh, not our church. We welcome everybody. Yeah, sure we do. We like to believe that. We aim for that. But to people who don't go to church, church is church. They don't see a difference between, this is our statement of faith. Couldn't care less. A church is a church. Christians are hypocrites. People don't love me. I'm not acceptable. Why? Some of you felt that way at one point. If I go into a church, the roof's going to fall on me. I've heard people say that. Now, they don't mean it. It's metaphorically that I wouldn't be welcome. I am unacceptable. I'm unclean. I can't go in there. Worse, at times, we still feel that distance. There's something going on in our life, whether it's something we did, whether it's something we chose, whether it's something that happened to us, and we feel, I can't go to God right now. I can't go to prayer right now. Maybe I shouldn't go to church today. We feel not good enough. We feel unclean. Now, that's an absolute lie. There's no rules about when people can come to Jesus. And I don't know how this guy heard that Jesus heals people. He couldn't have seen it. He would have had to keep his distance. And Jesus healed many diseases, but he hasn't healed leprosy. I mean, that's a big one. Now, we know that Jesus is going to raise people from the dead, but they haven't seen that yet. So this leper comes up to them and he's saying, if you will you make me unclean? I think for sure a clear application would be bring your trauma to Jesus. The guy doesn't get rebuked. He brings this pain, he brings this issue, he brings this idea of this broken identity, and he breaks all the rules. And listen, by doing what he's doing, he's actually, wrap your mind around this. He is sinning when he comes to Jesus because he's breaking the law. How about that? There's no wrong way to come to Jesus. This guy's doing it sinfully. What do you think Jesus is going to do? Strike him down? No, I've already told you, Jesus is going to heal the guy. This is like, there's no wrong way to show up to Jesus and say, I need help. It's a beautiful picture of compassion. He says, if you will, you can make me clean. Because he knows he's not clean. That's who he is. I don't know how long he's had this issue. I don't know how long he's had this problem, but there was a time in his life when he didn't have it, and now he does. This isn't just a statement of fact, Jesus, you can heal me. This is a statement of faith. There is no way this guy could have been there when Jesus was healing other people. Somebody told him. Somebody got close enough. Hey, bud, it's good to see you. We brought some food. Hey, you have to find your way to this Jesus guy. He was in town this weekend. He was healing everybody. Maybe he could heal you. So this guy finds Jesus and he comes, I have heard, I believe that you can make me clean. He doesn't try to hide the fact that he's a leper. They knew he was a leper when he walked up. He didn't put nice clothes on, pull his hair back. He has tattered clothes, his hair's down, he's covering his mouth. He doesn't try to hide it. He doesn't try to wait until he's all cleaned up to come to Jesus. Some people think, well, I can't go to Jesus now. I've got to clean up these issues in my life. Do you get cleaned up to take a shower? No, Jesus is the shower. Just come the way you are. None of that matters. Just show up. The guy doesn't try to hide it. He doesn't try to wait it out. He doesn't try to fix the problem on his own. He just brings this trauma to Jesus. And he makes this huge ask. He doesn't say, can you make me a little bit better? Can you ease the pain? He says, make me clean. Get rid of all of it. Take it all away. Now, if we add up all the stories in the Bible of people that have been healed of leprosy, you know how many there are? I think there's only one. I'm not counting Moses' hand. This is not normal. He says, make me clean. I don't want it to appear like I'm clean. I'm not asking for the strength to persevere through this trial. Why do we pray that way? Why do we cop out and give God, oh Lord, just give me strength to get through this. Hey, heal me, God, I want to be healed. Well, just help me to accept that this is who I am. That may be true, but we see people making some big asks. And he says, make me clean. Make me pure. Take all of this stuff away. He's asking to be 100% pure. I remember typing that, 100% pure. Are there really levels of pure? I mean, there's clean and unclean. There's pure and not pure. You know, if you're super old, you might remember the old Ivory soap ads from the late 1800s. But even like when I was a kid, I remember the commercials in the 1980s. Ivory soap, 99.44% pure. Is that pure? It's not. It's either pure or it's not pure. And this guy's not going to be okay with anything less than pure. I mean, by definition, purity is pure. For example, I have a pure bottle of water, 100% whatever came out of the tap. Right? This is clean. That's good for drinking, right? Everybody say yes so you can follow the illustration. Yeah, Pastor Bob, your guy teaches with authority. He's brilliant. And then I have this other bottle of water, and I put some drain cleaner in it. But relax, it's 50% pure. 50%. Anybody want some? Yeah, heck no. I don't want 50% pure. If I have to drink something, I'll drink the one that's pure. Now I'm with you. I'm not going to drink something that's 50% pure. It's 50% unpure. So I have this bottle. It's 90% pure. It's only 10% drain cleaner. Nobody's moving. Okay. So 90% pure is not pure. Okay. It's all right. Last but not least, 1%. It's only 1%. It's 99% pure. Who wants some? Yeah, me neither. What, did you just put your hand up? No, we're not going to settle for anything less than pure. And this guy's going to Jesus with the bar high. Make me clean. We don't settle for less than 100% in other areas of our lives. If your boss gave you 99% of your paycheck, would you be okay with that? Not even a little. You'd feel like you only got one. How dare you? You robbed me of this $3. I don't know how much you make. Are you okay if your spouse is 99% pure? No. That 1%, in fact, means nothing to me right now. And this guy makes a big ask of Jesus. I want to be clean. 100% clean. Says he comes imploring, kneeling. Moved with pity, he, Jesus, stretched out his hand and touched him. Does anybody have a word other than pity in their translation? What'd you say back there? Indignant? Indignant's so different than pity and compassion. Some translations say angered. How did these translators get it so wrong? It's either Jesus is angry or he's moved with pity and compassion. Which is it? The word is angry. That's the Greek word. The reason some translations use pity and compassion is how Jesus responds to that anger. Now, why would Jesus be frustrated and angry about what's happening? Well, he just made this big deal about, I'm not healing people, I'm preaching. And do I hate it when people interrupt my schedule with ministry? Pastor Bob, can you pray for me? No, man, I'm trying to work. Wait, no, that's my job, sorry, right? Now, Jesus wasn't confused about his job, but Jesus had a mission. And he just made a point to say, we're not going to go heal those people. I'm preaching, and this guy comes before him, and by the way, he's breaking the law. And Jesus is like, oh, man. I shouldn't be healing this guy. He shouldn't be standing here. But he's moved by his compassion. Because it doesn't matter how we come to Jesus. It doesn't matter that Jesus has already said, I'm not doing this, I'm going to preach. You shouldn't come before me, there are rules. The reason some translations say angry and indignant is because that's the word. The reason some translations say pity and compassion is that's the response that Jesus has to this. Have you ever been angry, frustrated with somebody, and felt compassion for them at the same time? Yeah, if you're a mom or a dad, you get it. You did what? Come on, I'll help you clean it up. Like, yep, I'm frustrated about what you did, but I'm going to help you. You were running, you were riding your bike on the gravel road again. I've told you you're going to get hurt doing that, but come on, I'm going to clean you up. Jesus is frustrated, but he responds out of his compassion. There's no wrong way to come from Jesus. Let's look at the rest of verse 41. Only a touch from Jesus can cleanse trauma. Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, I will be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him. Jesus touched him. Let's do this in slow motion. If you will, you can make me clean. Okay? Now, if we're Simon, Andrew, James, and John, we're thinking, that dude's not supposed to be here. Like, they know he's a leper too. Like, this guy could get us very sick, and then we have to go live outside the community. And then Jesus stretches his hand out. No! And Jesus touches him. Nobody touches lepers. When was the last time this guy had any human contact? How much love is just in a touch when Jesus reaches down and touches someone? Have you ever felt anything other than loved when Jesus reached out and touched you? Now Jesus is breaking all the rules. This is a crazy story. We just, Jesus healed a leper, move on. Just kind of slow down and watch what's happening. Jesus reaches out and touches this guy. When was the last time somebody was more concerned with this guy's emotion than their own well-being? Now, when you touch somebody with leprosy, you've been exposed to leprosy, you're contaminated. If we go back to Leviticus, you're supposed to go into a 7-day quarantine. And if you're clean after it, you get another 7 days either way. And if you're clean after 14, then you can come back to the community. But if you're not clean, you have to go live off in one of these camps. And this isn't a Jewish-only thing. This was every ancient society had leper colonies. The touch should have made Jesus unclean. By law, when Jesus touched him, the law says Jesus was unclean. And yet Jesus can touch unclean and make it clean. He just takes it away. I think it's awesome that our lives can't dilute the purity of Jesus. Jesus purifies our lives. There's no well, I can't go to Jesus right now because I'm less than, I'm undeserving. You are not going to lower the collective worth of the people of God or God's holiness by coming to him. There's no wrong way to come to Jesus. Now, you may be unclean. You may be unclean to other people. But this guy was not unclean to Jesus, and neither are you. Jesus has no fear of coming into contact with you, no matter what situation you're in. You may feel like I'm dirty, like I'm not good enough. You may have been judged that way by others. But that's not how Jesus sees you. Jesus doesn't ask the guy, well, how'd you get sick? Were you doing something you weren't supposed to be? Were you breaking the law then too? Can you sign off on my statement of faith? I just started teaching people. Are you okay? What's your political affiliation? Jesus doesn't have a bunch of questions for this guy. He looks past the trauma that the guy's suffering and he sees a person who's hurting. He looks past the rules and he sees somebody who's hurting. He looks past the sickness, past the bad decisions, past any abuse, past any addictions, past any neglect. None of that matters to Jesus. He's going to reach out and he can cleanse that trauma. And Jesus makes him clean. I thought I was done with the sermon when I got to that part, because there's just these throwaway sentences at the end that I thought they were throwaway sentences. But all scripture is breathed by God, right? Yeah. So when you get to those sentences, we're like, this is filler. They're never filler. Verse 43, and Jesus sternly charged him and sent him away at once and said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded for a proof to them. There was a process in Leviticus that once you were clean, you would go show yourself to the priest and he would examine you and yep, you're clean, you're good to go. So Jesus doesn't disregard the law. He's like, all right, I understand why you came. I'm going to heal you. And he sends the guy back. But since this guy's bad at following rules anyway, he went out and he began to talk freely about it. Didn't Jesus just say, don't tell anybody I healed you? Don't make a big deal about this. I'm already dealing with these yahoos who think my job is to run around and do miracles. So I'm going to heal you because I see your pain and I love you, but just maybe keep it to yourself. But he went out and began to talk freely about it and to spread the news so that Jesus could no longer openly enter a town, but was out in desolate places and people were coming to him from every quarter. Jesus takes our trauma upon himself. Guys, this is the gospel. At the beginning of the story, the leper was not allowed to move among the community. He couldn't be anywhere near people. Jesus was moving from town to town, right? If I back up to verse 39, right before the story starts, and Jesus went throughout all Galilee, preaching in the synagogues and casting out demons. Jesus had free reign to come and go. And this guy wasn't allowed anywhere near town. And now this guy moves freely among the people, and Jesus can't. Is that not the gospel? Jesus says, here, you take my status, and I'll take yours. You be righteous, I'll be sinful. You get access, I'll lose out. I almost skipped these sentences. course Mark knew what he was doing. Of course the Holy Spirit knew why he moved Mark to write these things. I mean, Corinthians says that Jesus becomes sin and we become righteous. And even in this moment, Jesus takes the stigma upon himself. That's what happened at the cross, right? Isaiah says that surely he bore our sin and our sickness. If you will, you can make me clean. Jesus says, I will. And in that great transaction, Jesus takes the trauma on himself. Jesus cleanses trauma and gives us a new identity. The guy's moving freely, telling people what Jesus has done. Now, what's his story? We don't read it, but we can speculate from the text. Do you think he's running around saying, I'm a leper, but it's okay because Jesus touched me? Nobody would have heard, but it's okay. I had leprosy. That's who I was. That's the condition I lived under. But Jesus healed me. Jesus made me clean. That's the headline. I'm clean. Not I'm a leper who was clean. No, I was a leper. That's old me, man. I'm not like that anymore. I met Jesus and now I'm clean. The trauma is gone. The pain is gone. The stigma is gone. I have access to people I love. I'm welcome in community. It's a new identity. His trauma is not going to define him. His sickness isn't going to define him. And your past trauma and story should not define you. It doesn't have to. No abuse, no sickness, no distance you feel, no bad decisions you make. You're not a survivor of something terrible. You're not a victim of what happened to you. You are not your diagnosis. When you come to Jesus, he makes us clean. There's a verse back in chapter 1 of Isaiah where Isaiah says, come, let us reason together. Although our sins are like scarlet, he will make us white as snow. Now, sins are the dumb things we do that hurt us. And if Jesus can make that white as snow, certainly he can clean the things that were done to us. This guy didn't go out looking for leprosy. You didn't go out looking for something terrible to happen to you. You weren't looking for your marriage to end. You weren't trying to get sick. You weren't planning on failing at that. You didn't think you were going to get abandoned. You didn't think this was going to happen to you. And if God can clean sin, surely he can clean trauma. Not 50%, not 90%, not 99%, but 100% clean. Old things are passed away. All things are new. Guys, Jesus cleanses trauma. So bring your trauma to Jesus. Make the ask. Lord, this hurts. I think about it every day. I can't stop thinking about it. I don't want this to be who I am anymore. Not, can you make it a little better? Not, can you tell everybody else it's fine? Can you make me clean? Are you willing? He was willing with this guy. He'll take that upon himself. You will truly be clean. And you'll have a new identity. I am clean.